Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writer's Mosaic. My name's Daljit Nagra, and I'm joined by three outstanding, formidable, important, significant writers of our generation. We have John Siddique, all the way up there in Hebden Bridge, I believe, in
Indeed,
God's own country, that being Yorkshire, John.
indeed.
And we have Hannah Lowe. Hannah Lowe lives in north west London, or northeast, is it, Hannah? Near
Yeah,
King's Cross.
bit further out. You'd be giving up my postcode next hour.
NW7, I believe. And in my bottom right corner for me, in sort of keeled over, we have the formidable Bonnie Greer, who is also in Central, but she's in Central London, Soho, aren't you, Bonnie?
Yes, for the moment. I feel like I'm flying out of here, but anyway, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. So that is the sum and total of my biographical expertise on your lives. Because it's not relevant, is it? Because you are
Oh,
established, well-known authors. So we don't want to go backwards and trace your ethnicity or how you're exotic, all that stuff. We want to go forwards and think about
yes,
Exactly.
more
exactly, please.
interesting things. So with that in mind, you all write in various forms. You've written loads of stuff. I just want to start with I'm just going to ask you very general questions. You're free to answer them however you choose. But my first question number one, is you write in so many ways, but and there are so many outstanding authors out there. What makes you distinctive? What makes your work stand out, do you think? I mean, I could give answers to it, but that's not really, I'll probably read myself into it. But we want to hear from you what you think makes your work interesting. What, in a sense, what keeps you going, keeps you riveted and excited. So maybe we can start with Hannah. Would you like to start us off? Why not? I'll just pick people and whoever checks in straight after can just start talking and carry on.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. I mean, it's interesting what you say. That to me, there's two questions there. One is what you think makes your work distinctive, and then the other thing about what fires your engine. And I'm not sure they're the same for me, because I would say that mainly I write poetry, but I also write memoir. And when I started writing about my father's life, mainly that was the kind of catalyst in my writing. I had no understanding that I would be one of the only people in the UK writing about the Chinese Caribbean. I didn't know anyone else, but I felt there must be others. And I suppose that's the thing that possibly has marked my work out the most, is sort of pluralizing the knowledge of the Caribbean, which in Britain is still sort of very much perceived to be Afro-Caribbean predominantly, like the full extent of its ethnic plurality is still not really known. But I'm not just saying I'm the only one. Certainly there are other authors like Kerry Young, for example. But so that, I think, is probably where I've made my mark. In terms of what fires me up now, like many years later, is related but also different, and it's much more political. It's a commitment to a left-wing anti-racist agenda and to writing about the legacies of empire. And particularly I'm interested in historical narratives that are omitted, why they're omitted, and what kinds of interjections can writers make, including myself, into making those stories known, to bringing them to light. So I would say that's like what fires me up these days. In another life, I'd have been a historian.
Brilliant. That's a very succinct answer, Hannah. And you managed to. This is what I like about these interviews. You ask one question, you get two different answers. Fantastic. So I'm going to turn now to John. John, you can take it however you want. I asked about what makes you distinctive, but you can talk about fire or whatever you want. But maybe
No,
we start with
it's
distinctive.
funny because uh, I think as part of my kind of growing up as an author, I identified with the word author, and but my life kind of took me in a lot of different directions, or in a very particular different direction. Um, Particularly between sort of 2012 2014, there's a massive change in my life. Um, and I stopped identifying as a writer. I stopped thinking myself as an identity, and rather just somebody who's expressing this life, who writing books is part of that, because the universe keeps inviting me to write books rather than me wanting to be something. And I think that tracks kind of with something that happened if I look across my books, across, like, the many years and decades of books, is that I could see myself trying to get out of my own way a lot of the time, out of the way of uh, explaining myself to other people and feeling like I should explain the problem that I am being a mixed race person to this society and trying to fit in. And I realized that if you just gave that up, you had a lot of freedom, and you could write what the hell you wanted. And so I just started doing that. And one strange thing that I found, like in the poetry, for example, is if you kind of get out of your own way and you stop living through your own sort of projection and story, you start to see other people. And I love other people, and I love life. And so I don't want to write about what I think life's about. I want to actually meet life more directly. And it's gone so far, like there's a poetry book coming out quite soon that has no metaphor and no simile in it whatsoever. It's all absolutely direct writing, as clear as possible, and getting out of my own way. And of course, that fits with my other work as well, which is, to try and help people kind of come back to a truer sense of who they actually are, and kind of discover the treasure that they are, not through adding belief to themselves, but by actually just coming back, for want of a better word, to their own soul, or to the life that they are, because we live through so much through acquired stuff that I think we sometimes forget the kind of the beauty of what it is to be a human being. So
Yeah,
I that's all that I'm interested in, quite honestly.
Well, we'll unpick that in a bit, John, because that's very interesting. Bonnie, would you like to add to that?
well,
Your
I began writing as a child. So we're talking about over 60 years ago. And I told stories for the neighborhood. I lived in what they would now call a ghetto. Wasn't to me, but that's what it was. So I told stories at night to all the children, and I wrote stories for myself on my mother's paper bags when she brought the groceries home. And I wrote all the plays for school, and I wrote plays in high school, and I wrote poetry in high school. And then I went to New York at the end of the 70s to write plays, and I wrote plays, and I still write plays. And someone asked me to write a book in the 90s, so I started doing that. And I think because I started as a child, I'm listening, I was thinking about it today. I think because I started as a child, I actually don't have any connection to the industry. I mean, things happen, but I'm not interested in it. Um, and um, and so in a sense, being a writer, to go back to what John's saying, I mean, that's what I am. It's not anything that I have acquired. I've been writing since I was a little girl. So that's the way I respond to the world. And then to become a Black woman writer, I mean, I was that for, I guess, from about the end of the 70s to recently, but I actually don't know what that is. So it doesn't, I just write, and I write my things that I write. And if people want to interpret that way, they can do that. I'm just really distrustful now at this point in my life of labels. I'm distrustful of people putting me in a silo, or anybody else. I think it's like very dangerous for a writer, because you don't get to come out of what you are. I can remember, and I think I've said this in my biog, I was once in a taxi with James Baldwin, and sitting there like starstruck, and suddenly he started crying, and was drinking some wine out of what they call a Dixie cup in the United States, which is a paper cup. And he was crying, and I thought, oh my God, I'm sitting next to James Baldwin, and he's crying. What, and I was like, I was a kid, and he said to me, I think I've let your generation down. And I said, Mr. Baldwin, what are you talking about? He said, I think I've let your generation down. What a burden to be an artist, to be a writer, and then think you got to be in the street too. So it's something that as I'm speaking to you now, I'm remembering. And I'm saying to younger people, whatever Black woman writer is, don't be it. That's the last thing it should be.
I love that anecdote. James Baldwin. Who can bring James Baldwin into the room? That's
I think
Well,
fantastic.
he's always here, you know. So
Let me just
Bonnie,
celebrate that for 30 seconds. That's wonderful.
that's the name drop to end all name drops, Bonnie. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I didn't know I was going to do that, but there it was. There he
well,
was.
I'm really grateful you did that, Bonnie, because that's just elevate the whole conversation. But especially, that's very moving, isn't it? About feeling there's a burden. But in a sense, that kind of abnegation in a way of like, I'm not going to write about categories, or I'm not going to be categorized. And yet, surely you're writing against being categorized, or are you not?
No, no. I mean, I can say for myself, I'm writing myself. And if people want to put that into a box or label, that's okay. It doesn't hurt me. But I've learned as I've gotten older to be free of that as much as I possibly can, just to break out of it. Because if I stay in it, I don't see anything. Because I don't live like that. I'm not going to die like that. So I remember something that Baldwin said again. I don't know why he must be in this house.
Was this in
He
New
said
York? Oh, in the
yeah,
house.
well, now he must be in my house of spirit. He said, we didn't, speaking of people of African descent, we didn't become black until we were on the slave ship. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. We didn't. So that's how I am.
I'm going to come back to all that in a bit, Bonnie. John, when you met James Baldwin, did he? Or imagine James Baldwin's with you now in the cab, and I'm James Baldwin.
Love that.
How do you, man? How do you stop identifying as an author, and what does that mean in practice when you write? So you said stylistically you're kind of maybe stripping away, but what about the subject matter then? What happens to your subject matter for the latest book? Is that stripping away of people, or am I going to end up reading identities in there and thinking about the burden that's in John Siddique?
You know, I think this kind of letting go of the idea of being an author is it's kind of, you've got to look at it the other way around. And that box, then you have to walk around being an author.
Perform.
You know, performative. And I've reached the age where I can't perform anymore, and or the soul level or whatever it is. And you know, no discredit to anybody after so many years in literature, both as a writer and somebody who commissions and edits and things as well, you know, for the RLF. You know, I let everybody be who they are, but that performative ego that we often present to the world, you know, you can see that people are dying behind those screens that they've made for themselves. And it's just like, man, will you just come and be with me? Just come and be a human being and be with me. And so if you pick up my book or Bonnie's book, and we've written in that way, then hopefully all you're doing is there's another human being telling you a story. There's a human being saying, this is something that I noticed about the world and I'm sharing it. And if you want to partake of that, then you can. Whereas if I've got to tell you I'm an author, then I'm telling you nothing real in any way. And we die because of this. We die because of this. And if you look at literature and what the festering aspect of literature and what it's become, you know, kind of inherited wealth, and only a certain kind of person can be a writer. I come from poorest of the poor, you know, and somehow, you know, the spirit of life or God or whatever you want to call it just said, nah, mate, sorry, you're a writer. There's no way getting out of this one, you know. It kind of just.
But John, can you tell me how it works in practice for you then? I mean, when you're writing your poems, I mean, at that moment you're writing something, but what happens? How does that inform the subject matter? Because when you publish a book, it's going to have your name on it. It's going to be called a book of poems, I assume. So it's being categorized to some degree. I guess in some sense you can't escape that, can you?
No, that's just what it is. That is, you know, form has. I'm kind of going down the kind of the spiritual meditation teacher route here, but you know, life has form, right? We wouldn't be speaking without form, right? But it's not the form that's speaking. It's mind, emotion, life, soul.
I'm just nod like a nodding dog.
You know,
yes,
right. All of it, right? It's that. You know, we say my body, my book. You don't say I am a book. You don't say I am this body. You know, we don't. So form and there's a line from the Heart Sutra, the Buddhist Heart Sutra. I'm not a Buddhist, but it's a beautiful line which says, "Form becoming formlessness, formlessness becoming form." The ineffable in us has to. The only way it communicates, the only way you can pick your child up from school in half an hour's time or whatever, is that your form goes and gets her. But you're just dad. You know, you're just that loving being that's dad. Why should being a writer be any different? Why can't this loving being just put some words to page without bigging themselves up, use the best of their craft and their experience and their skill, and communicate as transparently as possible?
And don't let anybody put you in
a
a box.
No.
Don't let anybody pimp you either, because the publishing business and is a business, as Hannah and John, all it's a business. And if you live long enough, you can actually see the business and what it's doing. I will not name a name, but I will say this. I had to do I can't even go there because that's even too particular, but let me say this. I was told that somebody, I can't even do that. Let's just put it like this. There are people who are sort of, they're like John the Baptist, and there are certain messiahs out there, okay, who are being nurtured and prepared and whatever. And the way is being made straight for them so that they can come on the scene. And when they come on the scene, they get the reviews, they get the blah, blah, blah. And then they become, which happens to people of color, we either become we're too old to experience, and you're kind of like cast aside because we're never developed. We're never ready. We are in development all the time. We're always being developed. We always have to write about our travail. We always have to write about the things that happened to our ancestors. Very few people want to engage with people of color, writers of color, from the spaces that John and Hannah and I've been talking about. They don't want to go there. Why? Because there aren't the critics who know how to go there. That's one of the problems. So I would say the younger writers, avoid it, avoid the category, avoid the whole thing, because then you'll last longer as a human. You last longer as a human being, because they'll eat you up if you don't.
I'm going to ask you to critique WritersMosaic in a bit, but I'm going to turn to Hannah now. Hannah, can you tell me a bit about your work? Specifically, you mentioned Chinese Caribbean, this sort of background that you have, and what are you what's happening in the work? What would you say that you're trying to eke out through those memories, through the experience, or what are we learning through your work?
It's interesting to listen to John and Bonnie talking about writing. I didn't set off to start writing with I had politics, I do, but I didn't start off writing about my dad because I wanted to announce myself as being other than white, which isn't what I'm commonly presumed to be, or write in a kind of social, cultural, political way. I was actually writing out of grief. I'd lost my father. He was a traumatized man who never spoke about his experiences of growing up in Jamaica. He was he ebbed out of living as a card shark, a very unstable, dangerous existence. And I started writing about my memories of him cooking Chinese food, which is the way he kind of communicated his Chineseness, also cooking staples of Jamaica, those sorts of things. And then I suppose what I realize now is that, it was grief. It was a kind of, it was a spiritual practice, actually, of trying to come to terms with a loss that felt beyond just the loss of a father, but a loss of a connection to a place that I didn't know and was never presumed to have any sense of, belonging to either. So that's where it started. But it also started in the sense of just wanting to make stuff. Like, I really strongly believe, I'm sort of diverging from your question, apologies, Daljit, but I'm kind of thinking, I'm trying to be in conversation.
Take it how you want.
With Bonnie and John, is that as a kid, I played loads of music and I drew all the time. And then as you go through education, those things kind of become, less important in terms of the curriculum. And then I was just writing essays. I was churning out the essay. I was like very academic. And it wasn't until my late 20s that I just realized that I wanted to be creative again. And so for me, the thing about, like, does it matter that I'm a writer? Not really. What really matters is that I make stuff. Like I really believe in that, just making things. I think it's therapeutic. I think it's it helps contain pain. It helps you do something with things that are difficult. It also helps you do things with joy and bliss as well. So I always feel like poetry was like coming back to drawing because it's so visual, and coming back to music. It's why I loved form. I don't mean form in the terms John's talking. I mean form as in like sonnets and rhyme. It's because they're musical things, and I understand music. So that's kind of like, as well as all the kind of political stuff, those are my thoughts about what my writing does, what it does for me. But these days, you know, I think I'm just nosy. There's a kind of like a natural nosiness, and I kind of want to know why people don't know the stories they don't know, you know. Particularly at the minute, writing a lot about like China and its relationship to Britain. I've been writing about China, like, you know, 17th century Chinese wallpaper in British great houses. I mean, one, it's just so aesthetically beautiful. But two, I'm thinking to myself, why don't people know these stories about where the money came from in these houses and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so I've become like a snoop. You know, I find myself snooping around the East End of London looking for signs of the old Chinatown and all that kind of stuff. But I think my dad's always there is the engine, you know.
Fantastic. So this is turning into a really interesting conversation. This is not what I expected this conversation
I
to
could
be.
tell.
Because none of you really want to talk about your work in any details. This is great or terrible. I know it'll probably get sacked in 15 minutes, probably get some. You were the worst interviewer ever.
I said something a little bit about labels and what I did for the Writers Mosaic. I took a term that I found on a list of derogatory terms for mixed race people, borderliner, which I thought was so interesting, this word borderline. I don't even know where it comes from, but borderline, you're mixed race, you're on the border. And I flipped it and thought about, well, what is it to be on the border when you can look in all the different directions? You know, how it evokes ideas of the nation state, but also racial classifications, which is, you know, that's what it applies to. And so you know, these things with labels, I think if you don't like the labels that you're being given, take them, problematize them, flip them, change them, transform them. And so that's what I kind of did with the RLF Writers Mosaic thing. I invited lots of writers to respond to the idea of the borderliner.
Brilliant. So let's hold on to that then, Hannah. The idea, for all of us, the idea we are right now Writers Mosaic panelists in conversation. How do you feel about that? I suspect we Writers Mosaic panelists are going to be watched by people of similar backgrounds to us. So we may be in a little kind of narrow tunnel. Does that, I mean, is that a strength or is that a concern for you, or is this not an issue for you? Because of whatever. What's your take on firstly the name Writers Mosaic and being part of it, and whether it's a strength or a weakness to be, you know, be viewed and be seen as a resource?
But the word mosaic is it refers. I'm a synesthete, so I always see things first and I hear music first. So when I see the word mosaic, there's got to be something that's not a mosaic, because otherwise the mosaic doesn't exist. So if we talk about a mosaic, then what's the thing that it's not? Do you see what I mean? Is it a blank white wall? Is it like a space? But that's not life. That's not how life is. So when you use the term mosaic, I guess in a way I didn't even want to like be a part of it, because I thought, what's that? You know, I'm now thinking about that, you know, because I think all of us on here now, the way we're all talking, we're not a mosaic. We are human beings, and this is how we express ourselves. And to talk about a mosaic is to speak from outside of the thing that we do or are or aspire to be. That's why I would say to a young writer or a young woman of color who wanted to write, I would say, don't be a mosaic. Don't be a Black woman writer or a mixed race woman. Just write. Don't do it. And somebody puts you there, run away from them.
You're brilliant, Bonnie.
John, any further comments on that?
Well, because I'm Royal Literary Fund, you know, you're Royal Society of Literature, I'm Royal Literary Fund.
Well, I didn't know there was functions.
So it's funny that we need to actually put the two together, I think, more. And Writers Mosaic, before it was called Writers Mosaic, is actually one of my ideas. So I started working with the Royal Literary Fund in around about 2012, I think, and Steve cook who kind of oversees the day-to-day running of the RLF, and I kind of we've just had conversations all along about the necessity of trying to do something to kind of change the mainstream a bit, because so many people just literally being left out. And one of the things is that there's a real tendency, for example, to always talk about new writing. How is this going to help new writers? One of the things I wanted for this project is that one way we can help new writers and current writers is to bring the light back to writers who have been overlooked in the past, who should have got more light shone upon them. That's a really big, important thing for me.
Yeah, me too.
And it was Steve who came up with the mosaic word, just as a way of trying to think of it as that we're putting something together in a way. It doesn't mean, it's just like Hannah talking about the use of form as in poetry, my use of form as in an expression of life through the body. I think that's exactly the same thing. We give life to a poem, and it has to have a form, and we are a life, and we have to have form. So we use form to communicate. It has its limitations, of course, and like any organization that's 300 years old nearly, because the RLF started, I think, in 1758. It's ridiculously old, but its purpose all the way along has been to support writers, and not just support them by saying, oh, writers, aren't they great? I mean, they have this pool of money that they use, and it's like WritersMosaic is funded for the next 10, 20 years. It's a long-term project. So
well, can I just ask you, John, how are we going to shine a light on these authors, these from different backgrounds, if we're going to suddenly say, oh, there's no such thing as author, I'm just a person, or if we're going to say, I'm just writing, I don't write about something, I just write. Bonnie, John, do you want to answer that for me, please?
What John's talking about, that this is a starting point. Okay, like I'm looking at Hannah, and I'm like, I'm doing this big curation at the British Museum with the director, and it's called Era of Reclamation, and we're just going to erase a lot of tropes about Africa as much as we can. And we're very focused on the Caribbean right now, which we think was one of the cauldrons of human genius. I mean, it just is underrated, overlooked. And I'm looking at you, Hannah. You're a trickster. I love that. I love that. I mean, you could walk in a room and then you start telling the story of your father, and people will go, I can see him now. I see your father. I see it. And it's like, we are tricksters in a way. We are kind of, people see a brown man, they think they see a white woman, they see a black woman, they see they like go boom, 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 boom. Okay, we're not in those boxes. Okay, we're not in those bags. We're not in those silos. We really aren't. The fact that we are at 5:30 in the afternoon talking about writing, when most folks trying to figure out, I gotta get some food in or whatever. So we're in a space where we can liberate, particularly our ancestors, people like Baldwin, who started being called a Black writer. He was much more than they claimed it. He loved it, expanded it, but he was more than that.
Oh, absolutely.
We are more than that. And I think what I want to tell young people, don't go there. Don't go there. The best way we can honor our ancestors and the writers who don't get the play, don't go there to that space. Don't go to that space. Because then what happens is you start to discover in the writers who are our ancestors, the breadth of their life. You can hear suddenly a writer from Trinidad who wants to talk about Sartre. You can suddenly hear an African writer who wants to talk about Mendelssohn. You can suddenly hear a Black woman who wants to talk about Freud. You can suddenly hear all of the parts that we are as artists, because that's what we are. And it's important, I think, for young people not to get into the business of this, because it's no good. It's no good.
So can I just ask a question then? I'm going to sort of pitch it in a very different way. So if I was now not James Baldwin, but Michael Gove, say, I would be saying, "You're fantastic. This is what I need. People like you who don't talk about all that Black Asian stuff, but say we're just writers." How would you respond to someone like that? Because I imagine that's a kind of Govian fantasy, isn't it? The writers don't say they're writers and don't claim. And I understand what you're talking about. You know, if somebody wants to write about
Oh,
Mendelssohn and have the freedom to write, but is there a point where we have to claim certain responsibility in terms of a political identity, or are
We
you
talk
talking more
ab-
and more about
we talk
storytelling?
about this with ourselves. Talk about this with ourselves. It's very important. And sometimes, and I'm only saying this, I'm older than all you guys. Okay, so I'm saying this.
Ourselves, we're
Sometimes
more
we
here.
have to put on the cloak in order to go out in the world and be in the world. We got business we got to take care of. Okay, I'm a Black woman writer. I'm happy to carry that thing. That's my business. That's the thing I got to do. Don't put it in yourself.
Right. Okay.
That's my point.
That's interesting.
absolutely. We're not talking about erasure in any way or self-erasure. Well, Bonnie's talking, and I look at the four of us here, and I so love what Bonnie's saying, because in a way it is just us here. It's just us, right? And so we don't have those labels, but when we meet the world, we use whatever we have to.
Yeah, it's
Quite
cloak.
honestly, yeah, we put on
Mhm.
if that's what
A
needs to be
cloak.
right now,
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's also a very simple thing to say that I do, I think it's important that writers like this group of people and other writers in the Writers Mosaic are visible, because there's a whole thing about who can be a writer and all that stuff about, the class, social class. Like, I was not meant to be a writer, not from the class background that I come from. And if in any way someone can look at me and think, well, she did it, that to me seems, I know it's a very simple point, but I do think there's something about
Oh, it's
being
powerful. It's powerful.
it is.
do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I also think, particularly in my case, I think because, like I've negotiated some very complicated, like kind of self negotiation about what I could say because of the way I looked and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that there are, for all the other people that are like me, fellow borderliners, tricksters that don't look like what they feel they are, whatever that means, and in no essentialist categories. I think if I can open a space for other people like me to talk, no matter what they want to talk about, that's not a bad thing either.
Yeah.
Do you feel you're actively doing that, getting out there? Do you feel that's happening, that people are seeking influence from each of you and trying to do things? Can you tell, or yeah, I mean, do you feel that's happening? Because I feel that's happening. Hannah, I mean, because obviously we write as poets, we live in London, so I've seen you and read your work. I can see other people sort of imitating your style, that kind of thing.
I
Which is
think more
kind of,
about I think more about one-to-one conversations I've had with writers over the years that have had the same experiences to me, like Ray Antrobus, for example, talking about ideas of passing, which, problematic term, what that means in contemporary British society, that kind of stuff. But those are more like personal interaction, like the interactions I
you
have with.
mentored him.
I mentored him, but he's a friend as well. And he didn't wear that. Neither of us have worn this stuff lightly. So having those conversations, I think, has been, it's been a really important and formative part of my life and existence, not just as a writer, as a person in the world, moving through the world. So, I think any space that brings people that want to express themselves in a literary way, not using authors, together to have conversations is a good thing.
John, I mean, I know you have a public role for the RLF, and you've written several books anyway. But how do you feel the role works for you of passing on, encouraging other writers to adopt this kind of responsible position to speak up for our communities?
I don't, if I'm honest. It doesn't enter my mind in any way. But the only thing that enters my mind is very little enters my mind actually. Getting out of the way and doing a good job kind of stands on its own. And you know, I can't speak for anybody else here, but kind of as somebody who has had a life of being underestimated, intelligence wise, soul wise, love wise, manhood wise, everything wise. Um, we can either be in reaction against what we perceive as being kind of like the sin against us, and that's very understandable. Like kind of post-colonial writing, years and years of kind of reaction that kind of just feeds the thing back to itself. so that, and then the lecturers make money, but we don't, sort of thing, which is kind of always struck me as a very weird kind of parasitical kind of existence, the post-colonial thing. So instead of that, just, well, what are my values? Being a human being, leaning in. Actually, when I write something, just doing the best job that I can. And then if somebody comes across that and they think, wow, I see something of myself here, or I know something more about how the world works now, or I feel the living heartbeat of that thing, then that's all the work that I need to do. I don't need to add to that. Why would any of us need to add to that? And this kind of goes right back to what we were saying right at the beginning. If we walk around thinking that we're adding to it, all we're doing is adding a big dollop of ego.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I say to young Black women writers, you write from, you want to be a Black woman writer, whatever that means, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's acceptable. And do that. But understand that you will meet other Black women writers. And there'll be another thing. I mean, there's a Buddhist saying, when you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Don't have any heroes. Don't have any idols. Read people. Be as well read as you can be. And learn as much as you can, but have no idol. Look up to nobody. Don't label yourself, because if you do, you won't find your voice. You won't find your voice. Your voice as a writer does not exist in the world yet. The only way you can find it is to walk the road by yourself. And I think, in a way, certainly that's what I'm saying. It took me a long time to find it out. Find out your own voice, and then that's how you write. That's what the world's waiting for. It's not waiting for any categories. The business is waiting for categories.
Sure.
The business is waiting. The industry is waiting. The awards are waiting. Yeah, if you want to do that, that's cool, because that's your choice. But all the time, you have to find out what you're saying. You are saying, because no one has said it. And that's where you have.
That's a brilliant note to finish on. Our first Writer's Mosaic. So all I have to say is read John Siddique. Sorry, I might call you John Siddique at the start, John. I'm sorry for that. Read Hannah Lowe and read Bonnie Greer, but demolish them at the same time.
Yes.
Okay? Destroy, read and destroy, and create anew, but without ego. Shed ego. I think that's probably the thrust of this episode today, isn't it? Don't we agree? Maybe.
Yeah.
But be a writer, but don't be a writer. Be an author, don't be an author. Does anybody else want to add any paradox to that? Okay, this has been a strange Writer's Mosaic. We're going to end on that note. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It was great.
Thanks,
Thank
Bonnie.
you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Hannah.
Thank you.